Hi again, friends. Today's an interesting mail day for me. I got 2 decks in the mail, which is unusual. Probably not that unusual for some folks, but unusual for me. So, let us take a look at the Wheel of Change Tarot. This is an out-of-print mass-market deck, but, he says, fulfilling his promise of enabling you, it is available in a self-produced edition through the artist's website, Alexandra Genetti. I will try to remember to put the link in the description. If I forget, you can very easily Google The Wheel of Change Tarot by Alexandra Genetti, and you will find it. I bought a used copy of it, excuse me, on eBay, because with the book and the deck together, it was a little less expensive. So you can buy the deck individually and the book individually in the new edition on the author/artist's website. In total, the book is a little... the package is a little more expensive in that way, and I happened to find this on eBay, made an offer, it was accepted. But I think the only real difference is that the card backings on the new edition are this, and in the old version they were that. So I think this became the new backs. And whether or not you want the book is entirely up to you. It's a big. I was gonna go into a different journey. It's a big chunky book, and what I'll do is when we start looking at the cards, I'll actually read some samples from the book. But this is not a lightweight little white book. I mean, for each, even with the minors, you're getting like 2 or 3 pages on each card. So it's it's hefty, and it's pretty well researched. And there's a lot, there's philosophical commentary in the book. Now, I don't know if the book has changed at all, but there's a lot in this, which was the mass market. There's some spreads, so it's not a lightweight. And I don't often read guidebooks or even, pay much attention to them. And I didn't really get this because the guidebook came with it. But I think if you're starting from square one, this guidebook is going to be a good intro for you. So if you are starting from scratch and you're drawn to this deck and you get it, I would recommend getting the guidebook. Also because she describes the meanings of the symbols in the deck. And this is, I think, makes some nods to Rider-Waite-Smith, but isn't entirely Rider-Waite-Smith. And so for those that are familiar, you will see some divergences, and that is one reason why I got it. I also have this interesting experience where I know I've had a relationship to this deck before. Now, I honestly cannot remember if I had it, but I feel like I did because I remember the book so well, but I don't remember the cards all that well. So I don't know if I remember looking at it a lot, and then early in my, because this came out in 1997, early in my reading life, I remember looking at it and thinking, oh, I want that deck, I like the art, but finding it really difficult to read because it is so divergent in many ways from Waite-Smith. So I feel like I never got it, but then I also feel like I remember the book, I remember the Fool card, I feel like I remember looking through it, but then when I saw an unboxing of this original edition, I don't remember the packaging. So it's such a weird experience. I feel like I had this deck, but I don't remember. There are a handful of decks that I had that I never used, that I got rid of at some point in my early days. I wish I had hung on to, that I wasn't in the place for, etc., didn't get, whatever the case is. But so for some reason I have a vivid memory of the book, not so much the cards, although I do remember some of the cards, but I don't ever remember holding the card. It's really interesting. So anyway, let's sort of dig in and talk about this particular deck, which I think is a really interesting one. It is one that I got because, well, first of all, because they accepted my bid, but also because it is, it falls into a category of deck that I really admire, which are like the Japaridza decks that are Rider-Waite-Smith-ish, but that make divergence and changes. And so I'm just sort of looking through the book to see if there's anything I want to say. So yeah, I'll talk through. I just want to see if she... It's sort of an earth-based deck, but it's not sort of pagan necessarily. I think it allows space for the return of women to divinity, and she talks about how, in the book, this sort of evolution of religion from a woman-centered event to a sort of a male-dominated event. She says, in each of the major arcana cards, we see the combined tribal history of a large part of the world. It is a very diverse and like culturally divergent deck, and I'm just seeing if there's anything that she says in the guidebook, but not really. So let's just start. So this is the Fool, and I won't read much of the major arcana's cards, but I just want to give you a taste of sort of how she describes the book. So she talks a little bit about the Fool, or the card, and its position in the trumps in this case, what it symbolizes, what it means, but then she also gets into like, for example, the Fool stands upon two green plains, symbolizing that the journey begins symbolically in the spring. Blah, blah, blah. The Fool's green clothes are also symbolic of the spring season. The yellow in the Fool's garment are symbolic of the sun. The bells at the bottom of his robe symbolize frivolity and call us to awaken and find consciousness. The sun appears on the Fool's collar surrounding his head. The head and its crown are symbolic of the power and control of the mental faculties and the ability to reorder the body to the will. So I wanted to point that out because she's really detailed about the symbolism she's chosen. On the Fool's belt is the closed pouch, a sign of his undiscovered potential. It is red to reflect the power and the passions of life still dormant in him. Red is the color of will. The fox is symbolic of the animal nature. So she's really detailed about, really, really chosen thoughtfully all the symbolisms and is talking about them in the book. Now, I think as a beginner, that can be totally overwhelming, because when I was a beginner and I would read these books, I would say, oh shit, like I'm not going to remember all of that. You don't have to. But it's interesting for me now to look at a deck like this, especially one that is not part of, or sort of taking a traditional system, that's departing from the traditional system, where the artist talks about what they did or why, and that's really interesting. So I do think, if you're interested in knowing about what the artist was chosen to do, this book goes nicely with this deck, and it's going to explain her symbolism. For a used deck, it came in pretty good shape. No box, but she put it in the eBay seller put it in the silk, which says it's 100% silk pouch. I don't think it came that way initially. I think if I remember correctly, it was one of those boxes where the book was there and then the deck was split in two. The only thing, there's like a little bit of staining on the sides of the deck. Just a little gross, but it looks like water stains. I'll probably edge them for that reason. So let us take a look. So here's the beautiful Fool card, and the majors are not numbered, which I like when they do that, actually, because you can put them in whatever order you want to. The cards are color-coded, so the majors are all this kind of lavender color. The wands are yellow. The swords are green. No, the swords are blue. The wands are yellow. The cups are red, and the pentacles or discs are green. So let's just take a little peek through. I'm not going to focus too much on the book anymore, but I will give you a couple examples from the minors to show how much is there. So fairly traditional in its way, in the trumps, they don't diverge too much. Here's the Magician. There's a real richness and liveliness to the art, which I really like. It is diverse. It is beautiful. It's rich with symbolism, as you can tell, and it's really attractive, which is also an important thing. Cardstock is very mass-produced. I think if I can compare it to something, it reminds me a little bit of the Wildwood. This was published initially by Destiny Books. I don't know them as a publisher of tarot decks beyond this. And of course, if you get it today and you buy it from the artist, it's probably going to be a different cardstock, so it doesn't really matter much. Here's the Empress, the Emperor. So there's just a rich color, which I love. I'm so drawn to that. And that's one reason why I remember wanting this deck when I was, 20 years ago, and but not getting it, or if I did get it, not using it, because the minors are so different from Rider-Waite-Smith. So this is the Lovers. The Chariot's very different, so there's a big departure there. Here's Justice. Just because of my Marseille-ness lately, I always tend to put Justice at 8, but again, they're not numbered, so you can do what you want to do. Here's the Hermit. The Wheel of Fortune. So for a deck that was made 20 years ago, it does kind of look forward to today and the kinds of decks we're talking a lot about, which is one reason that I like it so much. Here's the Hanged Man. I'm gonna sneeze. There's Death. Temperance. Excuse me. Here's the Devil, and I like this iteration of the Devil. Let's see what she says, because I think this is intentionally a pre-Christian iteration of this archetype. So let's see here. The Devil. A young man invites you to the forest drumming. So she talks about a triangular setup of the trumps, so I'm going to skip that part. He is the wild king of the autumn equinox, when the light of the year is fading and the bounty of the harvest has arrived. His are the unrestrained pleasures of life, when wine and beer are made, and when people retreat from their outdoor life and return to the harvest home and the joy of September bounty. The emperor, who believes in the supreme authority of the ruler, now gives way to the Devil, who believes in anarchy and complete individual freedom. The family now prepares to retreat for the inner life of home and more hours of darkness and the pleasures of the bed. The Devil's autumn world is one of amazing commotion, freedom, and uninhibited sexuality in the concealment of autumn's shadows. In the card, the eyes of the Devil draw you into his world, the world of nature and wilderness, diversity, and sometimes frightening darkness. So a very much more positive view of the Devil, which is part of my own interpretation to a degree, maybe not quite to this extent, but it definitely has a pre-Christian idea of this kind of nature, autumn, foresty sort of character. Here's the Tower. The Star. Really beautiful. The Moon. The Sun. Definitely babies, for people who hate babies or children in sun cards, although this does have a nod to Marseille, where there's 2 of them. Judgment. And the beautiful World card. And now we get into the minors. Now the cards' names are written on them. They're a little hard to see, but for the most part they're readable. So there's the Ace. Here's the 2 of Wands. So just getting into there, let's sort of read what a little of what she says for that card. She orders them a little differently than I do. Cups. Wands. 10 of Wands. 2 of Wands. Well, I'll just read the whole thing. Wands is the suit of fire and is associated with the vital spirit and therefore with the spark of life that animates living things. The Latin word anima, from which we derive both the words animal and animet, means soul or spirit and can mean courage and high spirits. The suit of fire represents the qualities of movement, vitality, and creativity. Primitive living things, such as these salamanders, who are without the capacity for complex feeling and thinking, are connected to the power of fire because the spirit and the breath of fire is within them. Their little bodies have been made more, what does it say? Their little bodies have been made more than the simple lump of matter by something that is difficult to define and to describe. They are animate beings whose capacity for movement is the obvious sign of the dynamic force within. In ancient times, salamanders were thought to be born in fire. In fact, the class of elemental spirits ruled by the element of fire is called salamanders. Perhaps this legend exists because salamanders made their homes in firewood, and when the wood was kindled, an occasional salamander crawled out to escape the blaze. Or perhaps it was because salamanders are often seen in the autumn when the bright fire-colored leaves fall to the earth, and the ancient people who saw them were reminded of the orange and yellow flames of the hearth. To us, the idea of salamanders born out of fire seems an odd contradiction. It is a puzzling contrast to their true nature as water creatures. In this way, the salamander and the fiery leaves of fall symbolize the duality inherent in the number 2. The Two of Wands is a symbol of the division and opposition of fire and water. The interplay of opposites, as we have seen in the Two of Discs, is the beginning place of new creation. Here in the Suit of Wands, it is an interplay of the spirit of living things. And then she gets into the description of the symbols like the autumn leaves, etc. In interpretation, this card symbolizes the growth of the spirit in its yearning for unification with its opposite and with others of its kind. We often need to connect with that which is different from ourselves to grow and change. The steam that arises from the combination of fire and water is symbolic of the action that joins opposing forces. So again, really thoughtful approach, definitely explaining the symbology and why it's there, and that's always interesting. So I will likely actually read or skim this book more than I generally do, because, and again, this is the first time I'm really looking at it up close, but I can imagine just wanting to get a sense of how she has come to where she has. The other interesting things with the minors and the pips, versus the trumps or the majors, is that there's a very kind of timeless element to the majors. There are modern influences throughout the minors, and so the Three of Wands, for example, has 3 electric guitars, and let's just see what she says about that, shall we? Because we're here, and you can always fast forward if you don't want to listen to me. Electricity is a fundamental force of nature. It is powerful and magical. Its force holds matter together. Our word electricity comes from the Greek word electron, meaning amber, which exhibits the peculiar quality of static electricity when rubbed with a cloth, attracting feathers and thread. Because we see the results of electricity, but cannot see the actual electric current, it seems, even to us, quite magical. Most people do not really understand its action, and yet they use electricity every day. Electricity, in its most basic form, has to do with the attractive forces inside the atom, which is the fundamental building block of nature. There's some more talk about electricity. The magic of electricity has to do with the relationship between the 2 charged particles of matter. Electricity is an example of the creative power in the friction of opposites. Every form of radiation, from light to radio to X-rays, is created through the interplay of electricity and magnetism. This card is about the power and the creative potential of electricity. The electric guitar is the instrument of a new generation and a symbol of modern times. Of course, remember that this was 1997. Of freedom and individuality, it exemplifies the creative potential of electricity and the power it has given us. This power represents adolescence and the energy we feel in this part of our lives. So again, really thoughtful, and I love that. So I think the book is definitely worth your time, just because I'm already finding it really interesting. But I don't want to belabor this. So here's the Four of Wands. Here's the Five of Wands. Again, some modern moment here with the Six of Wands as factories. That's really interesting. Let's see what she says about that. It is really interesting, and I'm glad that the book is sitting here in front of me. The disturbing image of the oil refinery has a place in the modern world, and the symbols we use should incorporate some of our modern necessities. The refinery represents, at some level, the ancient alchemical process of turning lead into gold. We pull the crude oil out of the ground, and through many complex steps, make it into a precious resource. Even the equipment reminds us of the retorts and vessels of the alchemical laboratory. The process can represent the journey into the soul to find their dark material that we bring into the light, and thereby turning the lead into gold. The oil is dark black and sticky. It is found underground and even on the ocean. It becomes the symbol for the digging we do to understand our inner selves. What are the results of the refining process? We get the precious oil and the gas that fuel our culture and allow us to speed through our lives. When the oil is refined, we are careless and let the less valuable parts escape into the environment without examining the negative effects of our actions. Our wanton use of the world's resources looks dark and dirty in comparison with the display of energy that the sun and earth create in the northern lights above the refinery. This is the pure energy of being in tune with the world. So, yeah. Really interesting. The Six of Wands, of course, this is very different than our Six of Wands in the Rider-Waite-Smith, right, with the sort of victory lap. So this is one reason why I don't think I worked with the deck earlier. Here's the Seven of Wands, the Eight of Wands. I love that this card is painting this card. And again, I do think this is the back, but it's a color wheel, which I like. 9, 10, the sort of flags of the world. And then the courts are Princess, Prince, Knight, and Queen in this deck. And I guess you can order them however you want to. These are the way they were ordered in the original guidebook, I believe. So here's the Prince, that was the Princess, the Knight, and the Queen. And then we get into Cups. So here's the Ace, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's the Princess. Sort of an interesting, like, St. Pauli girl moment there. The Prince. The Knight of Cups. And the Queen. And then we get into swords. So here's the Ace of Swords. The Two of Swords. The Three of Swords. Nice not to see a heart, but we do have an interesting interpretation of what is really the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning, because we have this stump of a tree and these saws hanging in the air over it. Here's the Four of Swords. And the 5. The 6. 7. 8. It's a baseball going through a broken window. 9. Some solar power. 10. And then here's the Princess. The Prince. The Knight of Swords. This is probably the only card I actually don't like. This guy, just with his mullet, just makes me think of MacGyver, which may in fact be the point. The Queen of Swords. And the Ace of Discs. And so now we're in the suit of discs. So here we get into the 2, the 3, the 4. I know these are apple slices because I looked at the book earlier. The deck did not come in order. I had to put it back in order, so I just looked at the book a few times. Here's the 5 and the 6 and the 7. Little mouse there. The 8, the 9, the 10, these drums, and then finally we get the final court. There's the Princess of Discs, the Prince, the Knight, and the Queen. And so there we have it. Again, like, I won't talk too much about the cardstock because unless you're buying a used version of this original edition, I don't know what the new version is like. You know, it's normal. This one's normal mass-produced cardstock. It reminds me again of like the Wildwood or, you know, even Llewellyn. Again, I don't think this was a company that did a lot of tarot decks, so I don't, you know, maybe not quite as good. I mean, there's definitely, you know, it's cheap, mass-produced cardstock. It's fine. I said I wasn't going to talk about it a lot, and I'm talking about it a lot. So, but this does shuffle quite well because it is thin. And as always, I'm going to lay them out and see how they look. Totally should have zoomed out and neglected to do so. Ace of Cups. I have mixed feelings about when cards are color-coded by suit, but I'll tell you this. One of the first things I look at when I lay out a reading is to see sort of themes and patterns and like how much of one suit is visible in a reading and etc. So like out of the gate, I sort of know, okay, I've got 2 swords, I've got 2 pentacles or discs, I've got 2 trumps, I've got 2 cups, and I've got 1 wand. So that tells me, you know, there may be like a deficit of fire energy in this person's life right now. And then, you know, I would read as normal, but that's how it looks really beautiful. I really like this deck. It's not a new deck, as I said. It is, this edition is out of print, but it is available on the author's website, I think with a different back. Maybe that, or that may just be the cover of the box. But this is the Wheel of Change Tarot by Alexandra Genetti. Really beautiful work of art, and hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're well.